So we'll be sitting together for 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll move into the infamous unfolding of a holiday-themed Dharma talk. I have a lovely bright red Grinch shirt, which someone gifted me with last year that I wear all the time. But given that the Grinch is not the star of the show tonight, he's like the warm-up act. He's not the main event. I didn't wear it. All right, and so we begin. For the sake of all beings, cultivating wisdom and compassion, cultivating patience, cultivating the wisdom to see the difference between our reaction to the waves when we're caught in them and our response to the waves when we see them as temporary phenomenon. We see the big vast ocean and aren't completely caught in the waves. May we all awaken swiftly. More compassion, more wisdom. Train the mind, for in the mind resides suffering or freedom. So we'll settle in for a period of meditation, cultivating the practice for the majority of you in the room here in the retreat of meditating at breath at the heart. Begin by just checking in with our posture, giving our bodies the gift of a little bit more support and loosening. Imagine being pulled up by the tip-top crown of the head and then sinking back down. Lift your shoulders a little bit, roll them back. Really, really important. Help open the heart center. Check with your waistband. Is it helpful to make adjustments so your belly is unconstrained? There are a lot of hang-ups about that. Don't need to. Letting the belly fall open lets various energetic systems flow better, and it is incredibly helpful. And then imagining or putting just the touch of a smile, or a larger smile if you choose, on your face. And we'll move into practice. Let's all begin for at least the first 2 or 3 minutes with hand on the heart center. Hand on the flesh of the heart, meaning I want you to press a little bit with the palm of the hand. White Tara, the statue, the Rupa behind me, has 7 eyes. She's got 1 between her 2 regular eyes, 2 in the palms, and 2 in the soles of the feet. It's a very useful, energetic area. So pressing the palm into the heart center, making contact, both hands is fine too. It does useful things. As mentioned, and particularly those joining online, Neil wasn't able to be here, everybody, so he kindly sent out a warning letting everybody know what class was canceled online, but I managed to Mickey Mouse it together, so I'm glad a few of you found your way here. Welcome. Pressing on the heart center helps open the heart, and it can feel poignant. There may be a wave of sadness. There can be anxiety. There can be neutrality. There can be ease. There can be warmth. But whatever it is, just observe it. We're working to nurture and open the heart. And bringing your attention, choosing to place the attention on breath. Breathing in to the heart on the in-breath, just imagining on the inhale. You're not adjusting the inhale. You're just allowing the body to breathe in its natural rhythm. But on the inhale, dropping in, if you wish, peace, kindness. And on the exhale, you can drop in mentally, silently, letting go. Focusing the attention on the sensation of breath at the heart center. If you find it helpful, you can imagine that rose pink ball of light floating in what we'd think of as the chest cavity. If your body was a crystal statue and all that was inside, the outline of your body and the posture it is right now, that you were turned into a beautiful crystal statue, and inside was radiating this light of loving kindness, of compassion, of wisdom. allowing the breath to be as it is, and directing the attention to the heart center. Using any of those tools that help. Hand on the heart, breathing in kindness, peace, breathing out, letting go. Focusing on a white, rose, pale pink light. Or letting all of that fall away and simply disciplining the attention to notice the sensations at the heart center of perhaps a rising and a falling, of movement as breath infuses the body.
If the mind is busy with thinking, see if you can explore that as just waves on the ocean. Drop in the idea of sinking down through the thoughts into the calm underneath them. If that's helpful. Or think of the thoughts as perhaps rather dramatic clouds in a sky, but imagine them fading, reducing, and being absorbed into the vast blue expanse of sky. That's the awareness I spoke of this morning.
big mind, awareness. Thoughts are temporary. Can we imagine them melting into the big, big mind? And notice whatever's happening in the mind or the body. If anything you don't care for is happening, physical discomfort or mental discomfort, see if you can bring some kindness to that. Instead of rejecting it, just kindness to the mind that might be worrying or sluggish. Ignore all this and stay with your practice if it doesn't apply. Bring some kindness to the body that might have soreness or difficulty. Sending some loving kindness and compassion to this mind and this body in this moment, if it could benefit from some. Great. In just a couple minutes, I'm going to offer a Dharma talk. Probably everybody's good to go right into that because it was a pretty short sit. Bladders are happy. Hello, Deanna. Donna, hello, James. Hello, Joanne, Kathleen, Keith. I'm glad you could join us, Keith. All the Island Dharma folks aren't here because Neil told them it was canceled. But I'll send them the replay tomorrow. So, I should have brought a Santa Claus hat for tonight. So, when we think of Dharma, it can sometimes feel pretty foreign to the way we grew up, to what we learned as children and through our life, being Westerners. I think everybody here. And I find it really reassuring, compelling, and hopefully very helpful for you when sometimes I take a very common story, a very common or iconic story that for whatever reason has really resonated deeply with human consciousness. Stories that stay around, that are popular, that we watch over and over again. And it's extraordinary and beautiful how often when we take a look at these stories through the lens of Dharma, we see the deep Dharma teachings within. So as I teased a little earlier before breakfast or before supper, tonight we're going to take a deep Dharma look at Scrooge, of Dickens' famous, infamous, iconic tale, The Christmas Carol. Here we are a week or so before Christmas, whether you celebrate Christmas or not, whatever you celebrate, however you celebrate. It's a very interesting time of year in our hemisphere. It's the time where we're just creeping towards another 5-6 days, not even, to the solstice, the winter solstice in our hemisphere. So each day, as we know, is getting a little bit darker, a little bit less light, a little bit darker till, where are we at? The 14th. So 15th, Sunday, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20, 21. When's the 21? Next Friday? Saturday? Thank you. So on Saturday, a week tonight, there's a little more light. There's a minute and a half of more light. How's that for an important metaphor? How's that for hope? That in the darkest night of the soul, we know eventually there'll be more light. Sometimes we don't know when, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's even remotely possible. In the depths of our worst grief, our worst losses, our worst anxiety and fear, we can lose hope that the light will ever be there again. Except here's the trick, everybody. The light's always there. The darkness is a shadow between the light that it's always present, literally the sun. Here we are, it's rather dark and gloomy, even though it's full moon. It sure doesn't seem like full moon. I'm not seeing any ambient full moon light out there because it's so dark with cloud cover here tonight. So dim. And we use language, right? We use language like, oh, the sun is gone behind the clouds, or it's dark, or we'll wait till the sun comes up. Well, the sun's always up, or the planet would collapse and we'd all be dead. The sun never changes. Well, it changes in little ways, but the sun is always radiantly shining out there in the galaxy. Luckily for us, or life wouldn't be viable on this planet. But our experience is that the sun comes and goes. Comes in the morning with sunrise, it hangs around. If it's not too rainy, we see it. We are warmed by it. And then at night, it goes away, right? Well, we know that's wrong. So take that beautiful knowledge to the concept of the inner light, the light of calm and happiness, wisdom and radiance. It certainly feels like it's gone. When there's storms and waves in the mind, a consternation of worry, of confusion, it very much, right? The felt experience is very much like that's all there is. There is no light. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. It's gone. Except it's not. So here we are in this beautiful time of year to celebrate, to contemplate what is darkness, what is light, at a turning of the solstice where there's more light, more light, more light. The Christmas tree tradition to bring light into the home, to bring spring in the form of growth, in the form of a tree into the home, to cover it with lights. Back in the day, flames, right? Now our little weird lights we buy at Canadian Tire or whatever. But we're bringing light, we're bringing spring, we're bringing hope, we're bringing renewal into the home. So I invite us to contemplate that a little bit. Now, in terms of the Christmas Carol, this is a story, unless you lived under a rock, we're familiar with, at least the idea. We know who Scrooge is, grumpy old a-hole, frankly, who's super mean to everybody. Bunch of ghosts come and kick his butt. Very interesting. There are so many iterations of this story in movie form, in cartoon form, different readings of it. What do you call it? Abridged versions, short versions. As part of my preparation on my drive, about a 4-hour trip from Galliano yesterday morning, holy Lord, it feels much longer ago to get here, which was a delight. And so I thought, oh, I know. And I got on the Audible book app and I looked for, I wanted a traditional reading of the actual verbatim text of the Christmas Carol. I know it very well, but I'd never read the whole book. So I found Tim Curry. Anybody know who Tim Curry is? Anybody a Rocky Horror Picture Show fan? Tim Curry plays Frankenfurter. He's an extraordinary British actor. And I found the Christmas Carol read by Tim Curry. And I listened to it for 4 hours on the drive yesterday morning. And there's some nuances in that story that are not in most of the movie representations, because it's a reasonably long story. It took about 4 hours for him to read it. And it's going to blow your mind a little bit how dharmic some of those things are. So to set the stage, and then I'll tell a very abbreviated version of the Christmas Carol, and I'll point out some of the deep learnings about the nature of our identity in ourself. We were talking about that today in small groups. Who we think we are, the causes and conditions that led to those rather rigid beliefs of who we are, and how we can look for the origins of those. We can see how we were influenced, and we can choose to be different. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. We always have choice to begin again. So I want to lay out, because there's a few in the room that may not have heard this teaching, one of the many lists in Buddhism. There are 3 root poisons, 3 root miserable mind states that are the source of all our suffering. They are greed, hatred, and ignorance. Classic, very classic deep teaching in Buddha Dharma. Very simply, they're about as obvious as they sound. A state of greed is when we want something. It can be as subtle as just kind of wanting the lights to be higher or lower, or it can be, aching longing to be in a love affair, aching longing for enough money to feel financially secure, aching longing to get a home that we feel will be ours forever, that we won't be asked to move by a landlord. Longing, wanting. It can be simple. Boredom. We want a different stimulation. We want a better story. We want to flick the channel to a better TV show. It can be feeling a little restless and I really want some chocolate. It can be small. It can be large. But one of the biggest sources of our suffering is wanting something. Because if we boil that down to its absolute root, when we want something, by implication and by experience, it means we're not fully content with what is. We just want a little bit more, a little bit more. There was a survey done, this is older research, maybe a decade or two ago, of millionaires and multimillionaires and billionaires to sort of see their level of happiness or contentment. And they found overall that millionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires shared 2 common worries or concerns. One was they worried about the impact of their wealth on their kids because they'd maybe worked extremely hard for that wealth, and their children were born into insane wealth, and maybe or maybe not that didn't influence their children very well. And the second thing they worried about is they thought if they only had 10% more money, then they'd be okay. Truly, really. From the millionaires to the multi to the billionaires. Like, are you content? Do you feel it's safe? Do you feel it's enough? They said, if I just had about 10% more, that's want. That's not feeling safe until we get a bit more. That's not feeling secure until we bring something in. So that's one of the one root poison. Holy smokes, is Scrooge a great example of greed? It's basically nothing but greed, except for a lot of hatred. And that's the second one. So greed, hatred, and delusion are the three poisons. All of the sufferings, and I invite you to please go do an experiment. All of the things in your mind and life and head and heart that lead you to be unhappy, small or large, can be boiled down to one of these three. If you're anxious, it's generally based in wanting something or not wanting something. So greed, I've explained for now. Hatred, strong word. It can also just be irritation, slight pushing away. The more accurate English word for the translation of the word moha, lobha is greed, lobha. Moha is hatred. It can also be translated as aversion, pushing away. Greed is I want. Aversion, hatred is I don't want, push away, anger, ugliness, irritation, and etc. This is the second clump of the three root poisons. The Buddha taught that these are root poisons. If you've got Scotch broom in your yard and you'd prefer it not to be there, A, apparently get a goat. They eat it. But if you don't have a goat, B, if you just chop it off at the ground, what's going to happen? It's going to sprout again, right? Because we haven't taken it out at the root. These are the three root poisons. The word hetu, H-E-T-U, in Pali, in the Buddhist language, means the root. And we must root out these poisons. And if we're to eradicate them forever, we need to completely pull out the root, which is what a lifetime of meditation, Dharma practice, and practicing with those 4 Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity, are to help us root out our greed, our longing, our wanting, and our hatred, our aversion, our pushing away. The third poison is ignorance. And this one would take a little more time to explain deeply to those to whom it's a newer concept. But in this sense, it means being ignorant of the truth of reality. Being ignorant of something like, if I have a great job and a car that works and a nice friend and a partner and good, decent kids, that should be enough. This is an ignorance that we have grown up believing and found by banging our head against the wall that it isn't actually true. Those things can be good, wholesome, and wonderful, but we're kind of sold a bill of goods that if we do certain things, happiness will come. Ignorance, when we think that person's evil and I'm really good, instead of seeing the suffering in that person, oh, I could go on. But for now, ignorance is not seeing that we're all connected. And that's not some hippy dippy comment, but that literally we're all connected. The amount of people that had to do something for all of us to be in the room tonight is it's so many hundreds of thousands or millions. And you may think, what? What about the people that envisioned building this building? What about the people that worked in the mine where the metal came from that made the nails in the walls? What about the people that logged the trees for the wood? What about the people who envisioned what a lamp is? And what about the person who packed that light bulb into a container of 4 light bulbs? What about the person driving and shipping that to whatever store where whatever person here bought it and put that light bulb in? When you play this game of interdependent origination, another classic Buddhist teaching, it will blow your mind to think of how many human beings that we'll never meet had an influence in us sitting in this room right now. The people that designed the fabric and the factories that we're sitting on in the chairs, our cars, the road you drove or rode your bike or walked on, the people that got the cement for that or the tarmac for that or whatever. Whoa! It's an illusion when we think we're a solo person. It's deluded. It's ignorance when we think it's all about me and what I do doesn't affect others and vice versa. So I'm going to stop there because I could go on for a very long time about the 3 poisons, but I wanted you to ground you in that classical, profound, key Buddhist teaching. All of our suffering comes from those 3 poisons, and the Christmas Carol is full of them. So the Christmas Carol, lest you forget, begins with 3 words. Marley was dead. Who's Marley? Who's Scrooge? Well, you probably know who Scrooge is, but just in case you don't, Scrooge, when we meet him, is an adult male in his later years who works as a moneylender or mortgage broker sort of dude in his business. And he has an assistant called Bob Cratchit, his clerk, his beleaguered and abused employee. And when we start the tale, we meet Scrooge, and he's in his miserly little office. Now, Scrooge, it's really interesting. This usually isn't in the movies, but in the book, it said that Scrooge neither feels the heat nor the cold. And that's a metaphor for the coldness of his heart and his lack of caring. So he keeps his meager Spartan office, and he's super wealthy, right? His meager office, he keeps it freezing cold. And he has a little fire in his part, more or less, so when his clients come in, they aren't really mad about it. And he's got this puny little, barely little coal fire in Bob Cratchit's room. And Bob Cratchit is terribly, terribly cold, terribly cold. Scrooge couldn't give a hoot. And as it opens, it's Christmas Eve day. Scrooge is at his office being Scroogey. It's become a verb, right? Don't be a Scrooge, we say. It's become a verb. What a great book. And he's in there, and what happens on Christmas Eve is the sort of things that might happen to us on Christmas Eve. He's in his place of work, and the local sort of benevolent society, maybe people like us that are going around trying to gather maybe donations or kindnesses or warm coats. I'm sure in Nanaimo and Duncan, there's always a warm coat drive to bring coats, blankets to the unhomed people, etc. Similar idea. Apply all of this to your present 2024 December life. So these people, these gentlemen, because women didn't do such things in 1884 or whenever it was, the men come into Scrooge's office and they say, you know, Merry Christmas Eve to you, great sir, and we're here to collect if you're able. You know, he's a wealthy guy with a very, very booming business. They say if you could give some, alms to the poor, basically. And he famously says, "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? That's where they should go. But sir," and they're quite taken aback, we want to help those that are less fortunate, maybe with some warm food in their tummy tomorrow and some warm blankets, some coal or some wood to build a fire. It's predicted very cold tonight. People may die. And Scrooge again famously said, "and decrease the surplus population." What a bastard. I'm sorry, but Scrooge is a bastard. So much hatred and so much greed and so much ignorance. And so they go off shocked and starry-eyed, and good old Bob Cratchit kind of says, "Merry Christmas, sirs." And they're like, "Poor sucker, don't like your boss." So then we go on. The next person that comes is his ebullient, friendly nephew, Fred. Fred comes in, "Top of the day to you, uncle. Merry Christmas." "What's merry about it? Humbug." Right? "Bah, humbug. It's a humbug." "What do you mean, uncle? Please come join us tomorrow. Please come dine with us. We'd love to have you." "I will not come." And then he berates his nephew. "Why did you marry?" "Because I fell in love." "Why did you marry? You don't have enough money. You're just going to be poor together. It's not worth it. You're a fool. I have no interest in your silly wife." I mean, he's a bastard. So Fred, who has an ineffable spirit, nice metaphor, nothing dampens his loving kindness, nothing dampens his good humor. Even this irascible, horrid old man, he still sort of sees the Buddha nature in him, is the language we'll use tonight. He sort of sees it, believes there's a grain of goodness in him, maybe somewhere. And he says, "Well, the invitation's open. I'll go. We'd love to see you. Come by at 4 p.m. tomorrow." He says, "You'll never see me there." We're like, "Man, we don't like this dude." So then the show or the story goes on. Scrooge locks up, and before he goes, he has to berate poor Bob Cratchit on Christmas Eve and say, "Well, I suppose you'll be not wanting to come in tomorrow." And Bob Cratchit says, "Yes, sir, it is Christmas Day, sir." He says, "Poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, because I guess back then they had statutory holidays." And he still had to pay Bob Cratchit. Weird and wonderful. And he says, "It's not fair to us." Blah, blah, blah. And Bob Cratchit's like, "Okay, thank you. I'm out of here." Scuttle, 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 and off he goes. So Scrooge packs up, he goes home. The story starts with "Marley is dead." Who's Marley? Well, it's Scrooge and Marley. The sign is still on the door. Scrooge is too cheap to have taken the old sign down from when Marley died 7 years ago and replaced it with Scrooge. Small detail, important detail. So he gets to his home, and in the book, it describes that he actually lives in some really meager Spartan apartment that his now deceased partner used to live in. So Scrooge is so cheap, so selfish, so miserly. He doesn't use any of his wealth, even for himself. It's just make. I don't remember it particularly well, but a lot of us when we were kids read, cartoon books, and there was Scrooge McDuck was a Disney character, right? And he was some grumpy old dude that sat on all his money and threw it around. He didn't spread it around. So he goes home, and when he goes to open his door knocker turns into the face of Jacob Marley and scares the everything out of him. And he thinks, I'm having a hallucination. This face appears, whoa, and it goes away. And what? He goes inside his cold room. He eats his gruel for supper. This dude's loaded. And he has gruel for supper in his Spartan crappy house. That's just how cold and dark, filled with greed, hatred, and delusion his soul is, his very being is. And then he's doing his thing, and he hears clank, 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 clank. And the next part is such a beautiful teaching of cause and effect, such a beautiful teaching of karma, which is cause and effect, that actions or thoughts we have an effect, not necessarily right away, not necessarily discernible. But I spoke yesterday or last night about if we're angry and we have an ugly argument with a stranger in a parking lot outside of the grocery store or something, we feel pretty yucky after. It leaves a residue on us. So there's karma there. We had an argument, we were unskillful, even if it was their fault, and we end up with some cause and effect. Cause, blah, blah, blah. Effect, we might feel quite anxious and uncomfortable. Some karma, it's not really the way you think. It's more subtle than that. But actions have results. I mentioned earlier, if you're driving your car and you hear a funny sound, often we're a bit lazy and we want to ignore it. That might lead to a result. The wheel falling off as you're driving down the road and causing a bad accident. So the cause in that case is choosing not to investigate an anomaly that your consciousness noticed, and the bouncers bopped it up to the CEO room, as I was saying today, and said, funny sound. And we went, yeah, it's probably nothing. It's better to get it just quickly investigated, find out if it's nothing. Oh, it's a loose bit of change rattling around in the do we have ashtrays in our car anymore? But whatever, in the whatever bowl. Oh, the Starbucks cup holder. We got those in our car, rattling around. What's the point? Cause and effect, cause and effect. So back to the story. Clang, clang, clang. And I want you to take this literally. I want you to imagine you go home tonight and there's no one home. Even if you usually live with people, they're away for the night or something, and you're in your house alone. And you hear a clank, 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 and a dead person from your past appears as a horrifying specter of a ghost with their, flesh partly rotted and like a really scary ghost. And it's there, and you recognize them, and he's like, Jacob, is that you? And Jacob Marley, the ghost, is carrying and like wrapped up in chains. And he's dragging these chains behind him, and they're really heavy. And there's link after link after link of his bad karma, link after link of the actions he's taken in life. This is built into the story, not the word karma, of course, but the concept is clearly laid out by Dickens, because he goes on to warn Scrooge, and he says, and Scrooge says, who are you? Are you not dead? And all sorts of kerfuffle and fear and terror. And Marley explains that I am 7 years dead. What are these chains? What is wrong? And he says, these are the chains I built in life. These are the actions I forged in life, my selfishnesses, my greeds, my not caring about my fellow mankind, my not doing anything to help. This I forged in life, and I am doomed, like other selfish spirits, to roam eternity attempting to make it right. How's that for karma? Do any of you feel like you carry some of the chains of the past? Yes. Whether it's our own misdeeds, selfishnesses, or foolishness, whether it's traumas that were perpetrated upon us, whether it's poor choices we made, etc., we certainly can feel in our lived life right now like we're carrying the chains of our past. How do we let them go? By letting them go. But Marley doesn't know that part. So he's trying to make good. He comes to warn Scrooge. He said, your chains were nigh as long as mine when I died 7 years ago, and they're much longer since. Dude, wake up. Do you want to suffer like me? This is your chance. I'm here to try to help you out of compassion, to get your head out of your ass. That's in the traditional text, I'm sure. Creative liberty, blame me. And see what you're doing. So apply this to yourself. Imagine tonight. I should have rigged up a bunch of ghosts with chains in all of your rooms. Maybe next year we'll get a bigger entertainment budget. And someone comes to say, you're blowing it in some ways. None of you anywhere near Scroogey ways, but we've all got our selfishnesses, our lazinesses, or our blind spots that we could improve a wee bit, or maybe more than a wee bit. So Marley says, tonight you will be visited by 3 ghosts. Oh, fun, says Scrooge. That sounds like a blast. He still thinks he's maybe hallucinating or having a heart attack, or he says, you could be anything. Why should I believe you? You could be an undigested bit of beef, a crumb of cheese, which is fair. Right? I'm having a bad dream. It's indigestion. This can't possibly be real. After all, we wouldn't think it was real if it happened to us, till it kept happening. He says, these 3 specters, these 3 spirits of the past, the present, and the future will be here to show you and guide you. Use this time well. And he disappears. And Scrooge goes, and I'm sure this is exactly the way it happened. He goes, and then he eats his gruel and says, that clearly wasn't real. And he goes to bed. But he's pretty freaked out. Midnight comes around, bong, 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 bong. He wakes up, and here comes who, right? The ghost or the spirit of Christmas past. And interestingly, in the classical book and in some of the adaptations, I've seen many of them. A good one is actually Disney came out with an animated Scrooge about 10 years ago. It has some more of the classical elements in it, beautifully done. I really love the 1930s version with Alistair Sim. Yeah, I'm getting an enthusiastic nod. If you haven't seen that one, dude acts his butt off. He's Scrooge to me. There's so many. Muppet Christmas Carol's a big winner with a lot of my students. Someone told me last week, they said, Michael Caine, who plays Scrooge in the Muppet Christmas Carol, she said, why I love it so much is he acts like he's going for an Oscar. He is so brilliant in the role, despite being surrounded by green puppets. Like, that's commitment to the role. I don't know that I've seen that one since I was a child, so it's on my list this week is to watch the Muppet Christmas Carol. But we'll come back to the Dharma Christmas Carol for now. In the classic, in the book, and in some of the movies or adaptations, the ghost of Christmas past is a being of light. They're a glowing being of light. They're actually described not really in human form, but really in a way like White Tara or someone. They're a glowing light being. And they come and he says, who are you? What are you doing with me? And they said, we're going to show you the past. And they take him and they fly him to his past. And there's a number of scenes that are very important. When you hear these, think of your own life. What are events that have shaped you? What are events that have maybe created a persona that's very shy and timid, or a persona that's quite aggressive and confrontational, or a persona that works tirelessly, but to your own detriment, to help others, to be liked, to be popular? We all have our stuff. And the Buddha, when he became fully awakened under the full moon on a May in Bodh Gaya, India, he touched the earth and he said, I see you, builder, you will build no more. And what that was full realization that everything is conditioned by things that went before. And if we can see the building of our current patterns, if we can see the bricks that led to the wall in front of our heart, we can demolish it. I see you, builder, you will build no more. I will no longer be influenced by the past causes and conditions. So back to Scrooge. We're going to go see some of his buildings. And the first scene is a boarding school, and it's Christmas time, and all the boys have gone home to their loving families, except for one weird kid nobody likes, who gets bullied all the time, who's alone in a room, cold, because they basically shut the school down, shut the kitchen down, shut the heaters down. This literally happened to my niece at her university a month ago. They literally shut the cafeteria and turned off the heat over American Thanksgiving weekend. And she was there and she was freaking freezing and couldn't get food. So it still happens. So this kid's left there because his dad's frankly a bit of a jerk too. And he's lonely and he's cold and he feels so unloved. And then something beautiful happens, which is his delightful, sweet, loving little sister appears. And she comes bursting in as your, 8-year-old little sister would. My dear Ebenezer, I've talked to Father. I've convinced him. He sent a carriage. We're here to take you home. So we see he has love and he feels joy. He loves his little sister so very, very much. So much. And we see, okay, this was a boy who was lonely, who was bullied. He wasn't mean at all back then. He just needed love. Sound familiar? Then we see another scene. We see him now as a young man, maybe 18 or 20 in modern day terms, probably younger back then. And he's apprenticed, and we see him in an office, not entirely unlike what he's doing now in the present day. And he's there with his boss and another clerk. And we learn rather shortly thereafter, it's Christmas Eve, back when he was a young fellow. And his boss is this corpulent, chubby, cheerful Santa Claus-like fellow called Mr. Fezziwig, if you know your Dickens. And he's there, and Mr. Fezziwig looks at the clock, and it's 7 p.m. He says, okay, boys, let's clear up. Let's get ready for the big party. And they race and they put out the close sign and they shut the shutters and they clear off all the furniture. And Mr. Fezziwig's delightful wife comes and the maids of the town come and employees and the friends. And there's this boisterous, loving family celebration. There's dancing, there's food, there's sweets, there's games, there's laughter. And we see Scrooge lit up, so loving his chosen family. His family of his wonderful boss who've welcomed him with open arms in his job. And we see him dancing with a beautiful young lady. It's got to be part of every tale. And he's dancing with this beautiful young lady, and we see that they're in love, and he proposes to her, and they become promised to each other. Everything looks great. How could this young man, full of hope, full of possibility, full of love in his heart, the love of family, kindness, Mr. Fezziwig also sends out parcels to the poor, sends out kindness to the people in his neighborhood, in his area that need help. He's a generous, beautiful being. And we see Scrooge loving it, every minute of it. Then we see, fast forward, the next part. And it's some years later, and we see Scrooge, and he's working late. And we sort of glean that maybe Mr. Fezziwig maybe has died, and he's working away, building his fortune. And it unfolds, I won't go into all the detail, but it unfolds that his fiance comes to him and says, basically, we need to talk. Even back then, that was a thing. We need to talk. And she says, I want to release you from your promise. He says, no, what do you mean? Of course, I still want to marry you. And she says, all you do is work. You've become so different than who you were. I'm still poor. We were both poor. I still love family. I care about things more important than money. And if you were to meet me today, would you still ask me to be your wife? And she's very kind about it, very kind. And he hesitates. And she says, this is what I mean. I release you, but I don't want you to release me. I release you, Ebenezer. You're on a different path, and I don't want to stand in your way. I'm just a simple girl who wants to be happy. Who's the wiser one? And that's what we see of his past. And then we get a glimpse, we glean, we realize that his beloved little sister, when she grew up to become a married woman, she died in childbirth. And that child is her nephew, Fred, the one who came to invite him over, uncle, please come, uncle. So we get a cause and condition, a brick in the story as to why maybe he resents Fred so much. No fault of an infant, but my sister died giving birth to you. What worth are you? So as we watch, unless we're very Scroogey, we start to feel a bit of empathy for Ebenezer, a little bit. Not an excuse for his current behavior, but some reasons. Some reasons. We can see lonely, bullied boy, hopeful young man, loving life and family, and then getting absorbed, as so many of us do, into going after the almighty dollar or the money or the career or the accolades or the reputation, or paying off your mortgage before you're 52, or getting X amount of dollars in RRSPs, like that's going to really make your life better. It's not always a bad idea. I'm not saying that, but we get so caught up in driving for something in the future, driving for things that are going to make us happy forever after, that we sometimes blow right by the simple happinesses of hearth and home, of kindness, of compassion, of sharing whatever we're able to achieve with others who maybe are not as fortunate. So there's his past, and it's sobering him up a little bit, but he's still not really getting it. It's more like, okay, you showed me all that. And his heart warms when he sees his sister, and in the past, his heart warms when he sees Fezziwig. He's quite delighted, but he's not really getting it yet. So then we're back. And he's in his bed, and he's shaking in his boots, and he falls asleep. And an hour later, bong, bong, we get the ghost of Christmas present. And he's depicted traditionally and in some of the adaptations as this huge, jolly, Santa Claus-like figure. Classically, he's got a big, think of a Santa Claus robe, but it's green, it's forest green, and it is trimmed with the white fur that our traditional Saint Nick or Santa Claus red robe is trimmed with. And if you know the story, he's laying back in the other room, like in a cornucopia, a horn of plenty, food and treats and abundance all around him, just magnificent feast to feed all beings. Some of the classical prayers in Tibetan Buddha Dharma say inviting all beings to the feast. It's inviting them all to the feast of Dharma, to share as we're doing in our own ways right now. We're all imbibing in the feast of Dharma. So there he is, and he's jolly, ho, 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 ho. I don't know if it related and came into the Santa thing. That I don't know. Maybe I'll research it. But he basically says, ho, ho, ho. And he takes Scrooge and he says, we're going to show you the present, right? So he takes him to the not very nice part of town, the dodgy part of town. Crime happening in the streets, a lot of poor people, a lot of begging, a lot of street urchins, poor homeless children, starving, hungry in the streets. And they wind through these streets and they get to a very humble little 4-room semi-home. And we learn that's the home of Bob Cratchit, the beleaguered clerk, and his family. And as you know, or maybe you're hearing it for the first time, we go into the Cratchit home and we see Mrs. Cratchit is cooking, getting ready for their Christmas feast, and they're waiting for their daughter Martha to come home, and she comes home, and there's the 2 little kids, and then the older son who's been given a position, which means he's got a job, which is very hard to get and a very big deal, and he'll be being paid 3 shillings a week or something that's going to really help this very poor family, because they get by on dad's 15 shillings a week, which is way, way, way below poverty wages from what we understand. And then Cratchit's not there yet. And then he comes in, bouncing in, Bob Cratchit with Tiny Tim on his shoulder. And Tiny Tim is tiny. He's a very small boy with very frail limbs, likely polio. And he has twisted legs that are in iron braces to walk like this. And he's got a crutch. And he's, in this story, more or less a personification of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is loving kindness and compassion, those 4 things we've been talking about on this retreat. Just not selfish, just kind, just thoughtful for others, joyful despite struggle. So they come in and everybody's happy and they hug and Martha hides and then she jumps out and all the things we don't need to really go into. I guess I'm kind of a Scrooge fan. And then Scrooge is watching and he's, watching and he's like, will the boy die? And a ghost of Christmas present says, it remains to be seen. I do not know. I do not know what is written. We can only see what is, not necessarily fully what will be. And he watches, and we see it maybe start to dawn on Ebenezer Scrooge a bit. He watches a family that has very little of the things we're told will make us happy, a big, warm, comfy home, etc. But they have love and they have connection, they have humor, they have compassion. And then there's the details of, they're very excited because it's the most beautiful goose we've ever seen. And we learn their house is basically 1 room, 1 bedroom, and a washing station with like a bowl of water to wash in. They don't have a stove or anything, probably just a tiny little, like, think of a Coleman stove. So the goose is cooking down the road at the butcher's that has communal ovens where the poor people that don't have their own kitchens can cook. And so they send off whichever kids to get the goose, and they bring the goose back. And in the telling of the original tale, it's very clear that the goose is very small for a family of 2 adults and 6 children, 2 of children which are grown. But they're so thrilled to have it. And there's this line in the book, something along the lines of, it was never mentioned how small the goose was, for never would a Cratchit ever bring attention to that. Like, we won't ever look at what's missing. Like I was talking about this weekend, looking for what's wrong, looking for what's missing. It's a really nice goose, but it's really small. Instead, it's just, we've got a goose, and everybody gets the weeest little bit, and they eat the whole thing except a tiny little piece of bone that is left, sucking the marrow out of it and whatnot. And they say it's the finest feast we've ever had. And then we have the plum pudding. Any plum pudding fans in the house? There usually aren't a lot. Did you have British grandparents by any chance? I freaking love plum pudding. My grandma was from Yorkshire. When we serve it, all our guests are like, no, thank you. And then the few of us that like it are like, nom, 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 nom. So the pudding is singing in the copper. Because, as I'm sure Ian knows and other people might know, generally, traditionally, plum pudding is steamed. So it's in a copper pot and it's steaming. Why is this important? Because of the joy of what is admittedly probably a very tiny pudding for 8 people, but it's a pudding and it's ours. And so Scrooge is watching, and hopefully his cement-filled head is seeing, this is really nice. They're so poor. They have so little. And then comes a really important moment when they've had their meal. And I don't think this is in a lot of the movies I've seen, but having just listened to the whole book yesterday, Bob Cratchit cooks up some gin and lemon. I remember that from the movies so much. And they all pass around the pot. They're getting loaded together. It's delightful. They have a wee sip of their, Christmas cheer. It also explains why he's late for work the next day. That's always in the movie, but not the fact that he's freaking hungover on his lemons and gin. Anyway, just saying, I'm here to edify. I'm an educator at heart. So they're watching all this, and then Bob Cratchit, who's just a really kindly fellow, he says, I propose a toast to the founder of the feast, Mr. Scrooge, and his wife just about hits the bloody ceiling. She says, I will not toast to that vile, selfish man. He treats you, and she's a very loving person, but this is her trigger. This horrible man who treats you so horribly. I will not toast to him. I will not thank that dreadful man for anything. And he says, oh, but dear, it's Christmas. For the children, for Christmas Day, for the spirit of Christmas. And she says, I will toast that man for you, Bob. I will toast it for the spirit of Christmas Day, and I will toast for the children. I will not toast for Mr. Scrooge. Here's to Mr. Scrooge. And he's watching this. And for maybe the first time since he was a young man, he feels badly. He sees in a mirror. It affects him. And then he's whisked away to the next home on Christmas Day. He's whisked away to Fred's home, his nephew. Christmas Day, Christmas afternoon, 4 p.m. when he was invited to come. And Fred and his silly, delightful bunch of friends, he's married, so let's say they're all like 20 or something, and he's got their friends over and they've got their meal. They're not very wealthy. They're much better off than the Cratchit family, but simple. But they're playing games, they're playing charades, and they're playing, there's a whole long scene about playing blind man's bluff, but his friend's got a crush on someone's sister. And so he keeps bumping into her because he's cheating, so he can basically cuddle her. It's quite funny. Not usually in the movie, just saying. And Scrooge is watching all this joy and lightheartedness and humor and family. And then they play a game called Yes or No, which we could all play, where I could decide I'm anything I want to be. I could be a teapot or whatever. And you ask a question, are you animate or inanimate? Or are you alive? I'd say no. Are you big as a fridge? No. So on. Easy. And so Fred is doing it. And they're like, are you an animal? He says, yes. And then, are you a tiger? No. Are you a frog? No. Are you this? And it goes on and on and on. And do you have fearsome teeth? Yes, I do. Do you have a fearsome temper? And so on and so on. And finally, he just bursts out laughing and he says, I'm Mr. Scrooge. I'm Uncle Ebenezer. And they laugh and laugh and laugh because no one's a more terrifying, nasty animal than Ebenezer. And he's there and he's watching and he is sobered. Because it's not cruel. It sounds a bit cruel, but the way it's portrayed is they're laughing. And then some people say, your uncle, boy, he's a piece of work. And Fred said, I know he is, but I feel deeply sad for him. I wish he'd join us. I wish he could let us into his heart. I know he loved my mother very well. And I feel sad for the old man. And they toast him, not ironically. And Scrooge takes him in. And then there's a part where the ghost of Christmas present takes Scrooge around and he shows him the poverty and he shows him the starving people and he shows him the shivering children. Not always in the adaptations. They Disney up the adaptations, right? They keep it away from some of the real bleak horror of reality. Well, we don't do that in the Dharma. We look at reality. And then there's a moment that I've not seen in any of the adaptations except the one that actually Disney did 10 or so years ago. It may be in others and I may have missed it, but it's very clear in the novel that the ghost of Christmas present is becoming older and older over this showing of Scrooge. And Scrooge says, Spirit, are you aging? He says, yes, I die at the end of tonight at midnight. I die. He's the cycle of life. From beginning robustness, cornucopia, down to death. And then under his robes, under his big Santa Claus robe, colored green, right down to his feet, there's a stirring of movement. And there's this claw-like hand that comes out. And Scrooge says, Spirit, I believe there's something there. And they open the robes and there's two feral children. Not a lot of you have seen this part. Some of you that know the more traditional story. A lot of us are like, I don't remember that part. It's the most important part. They take it out. They pretty it up. There's these starving, emaciated, they're like feral children. They're almost like goblin children. They're horrifying. They've got scabs, blisters. They're suffering. They snarl. They hiss. They're crumpled. And Scrooge says, what on earth is that? And the ghost of Christmas present says, he says, these are want and ignorance. And Scrooge is hatred. We've got want or greed, we've got ignorance, and we've got hatred. As far as I know, Dickens never studied Buddha Dharma, but hear the universality of a brilliant mind saying, and Scrooge says, so what are these? He says, these are the children of mankind, ignorance and want. And it's meant to symbolize when we ignore the suffering in the world, when we aren't moved to help from compassion, when we don't serve the starving, the needy, the less fortunate, this is what is left. We have created this with our lack of helping. The three poisons, greed, ignorance, and hatred, the two children of mankind, greed, ignorance. Scrooge is hatred personified because he's not so much greed. He's very greedy, but his whole personality is hatred. Like he doesn't even enjoy his wealth. He doesn't even Scrooge McDuck it. We don't know where it is, in a RRSP somewhere, I guess. But he doesn't use it for himself. He doesn't use it for anyone. He just collects it and he just hates everything and everybody good. So then Scrooge's time with the ghost of Christmas present is finished, and he's seen love, he's seen connection, he's seen possibility, he's seen how unpopular he is. And there's one more scene before they bring him home. And in that scene, they visit a bedchamber, as they say, four-poster bed, and there's this cackling couple of washerwomen. And they're there and they're taking down the brocade curtains from the room, and they're taking the bed sheets and they're taking all the stuff and they're wrapping it up, and they're talking about this loathsome, vile, hateful person that they've worked for all these years who was cheap and horrid, and at least they'll get something now that he's dead. And then they go to basically the pawn shop And they take their bundle of stuff and say, I've got these curtains, I've got this really nice night dress, like a sleeping shirt for a man back then. And they said, no point burying him in it. You know, we've got the night shirt. We want our money for it. I put him in an ugly old stained one. Right? They're quite loathsome and greedy. And who can really blame them? Because he's treated them like crap all these years. And he's pretty sure it's him. He's pretty sure. He says, I don't want to look. I don't want to look. I don't want to see who's dead in there. I don't want to see who they're stealing from, who they hate so much, and anything else. And then he falls to his knees. And then there's another scene where there's a funeral and everybody's just saying, good riddance. I only came because there's lunch and all this stuff. It's not really what we want our final moments to be. And then he says, he pleads to the ghost. He says, isn't there anyone anywhere in this city who has anything good to say about this man who's died? And they said, there's one. And then they take him to a place he doesn't recognize. And there's a pretty meager little house, couple of children and a wife waiting for her husband to come home. And we don't recognize these characters. And the husband comes home and he looks kind of loopy. And she says, what's up? You're late. How did it go? And he said, well, I have bad news that's good news. And she says, what? What did Mr. Scrooge say? What? And he says, he's died. And her face lights up, and we learn that he holds their mortgage effectively, and he was evicting them because they were late on a payment. And the husband had gone to beg him to just give us a little more time. We can pay it next week. But he died. So the only person who's happy, the only person who has any good thoughts about him are the people we feel really good about Scrooge because he's dead, and now we won't lose our house. So there's a lesson. Then he's back in his bed. Holy smokes, one more to go. Poor dude. I feel sorry for him at this point. So then the ghost of Christmas future, which is almost always depicted and classically described as a figure. We don't see the face. We don't see anything, all robed in black, kind of like the personification of death with its scythe, that sort of thing. And it comes and all it does is grab his hand and it flies him. And he says, are these the things that will definitely be, or are these the shadows of things that might be? And death doesn't say anything. He takes him to the Cratchit house, and it's somber, and the wife is doing some darning to make some extra money, and the kids are there, and there's a crutch leaning against the fire and a little chair that's empty. It's really sad. And Bob Cratchit's not there, and they say, where is father? Where is father? He's late. And his wife says, he walks so slowly now. He used to walk so much more quickly with Tim upon his shoulder. And he comes in, and of course there's no Tim, and he's just bereft. He's like a shadow of a former self. And he says, I went to visit him. You'd like it. He's got a view. He's got a view of the river in his graveyard plot. Right? And he breaks into tears, and they comfort him. And they say, he was so good. Do you know what he said to me on Christmas when we came home from church? He said he hoped that seeing him, the people in church that saw him, he hoped it made them feel happy because they could see through seeing him and his being crippled and his issues, that they could feel grateful for their bodies, and they could feel grateful for their health, and they could feel grateful for their wonderful lives. What a compassionate little monkey. Can't we be more like that? Yeah, the answer is yeah, we can. So then he takes him to another funeral of some dude that everybody hates. We figure out it's him. And then it comes, and the one time we see any part of the ghost of Christmas future is when the spectral bony hand comes out and it points to a grave. And we see Ebenezer Scrooge, 1842 or whatever, too. And the snow is up, so we can't see the death date. And that wigs Scrooge out, as it would wig you out as well, to say, when is it? When is it? And then boom, he's back in his bed. He's asleep. And he wakes up. He doesn't know if he's alive or dead. He doesn't know what day it is. He doesn't know if it's years in the future. He doesn't know anything. And he gets up, and quite delightful. He gets up and he runs to the window and he throws up the sash and he sticks out his head and he sees a little boy and he says, hey, you there, lad, wonderful lad, beautiful lad. What day is it? And the guy goes, drink much? And the little kid says, Well, it's Christmas Day, of course. And Scrooge says, it's Christmas Day? And then he dances a jig. This is Scrooge, he's dancing a jig. And he says, it's Christmas Day. The spirits did it all in white. Oh, marvelous boy. Oh, delightful boy. Oh, wonderful boy. Oh, intelligent boy. Do you know the poulterer's in the corner? What, you mean the one with the prize-winning turkey that's bigger than me? That's the one. Delightful boy, such a boy. He says, if you run and fetch the poulterer and bring him back here with the prize-winning turkey, I'll give you a shilling. If you do it in under 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown, which is apparently more than a shilling. It's a good deal. And so the kid goes, Vyom! And he comes back with the poulterer and the gigantic turkey that's so huge. In the book, Dickens says that there's no way that turkey could have walked on its 2 legs. They would have snapped. That's a pretty good description of how big and fat that turkey is. And he pays for the turkey, and he writes out the address for Bob Cratchit's home and anonymously sends this turkey. And he says, Tiny Tim will have a marvelous feast. They'll have a beautiful dinner. They will be so happy. It'll be so wonderful. And he won't know it's me. And then literally hat in hand, which may be where the phrase comes from. You know, many phrases in English are derived from stories, etc. I'm not sure that one is. He goes hat in hand to Fred's house, and he arrives at 4 p.m. And the maid opens the door and says, I'll show you up. He says, no, I know the way. He knows me. And he goes up, and everybody goes, da-da-da-da. Uncle Scrooge, says Fred, and he greets him, and his friends are all like, it's that guy, it's the dude, it's the mean one. I know, it's crazy. I thought he never left his lair, and so on. And then they welcome him in, and he is part of what he saw in The Ghost of Christmas Present. He plays the games, he eats the feast, he laughs, he has a dance, he hugs his niece-in-law, he's kind, and he's welcome, and he has family. And then it's what we would call Boxing Day. Maybe they call it, anybody know if they called it Boxing Day back in the 1880s? Ian, you know? Not sure, maybe they did. But anyway, it's the day after Christmas Day. And Scrooge hustles to get to work early, and he's, oh, I hope I get here before Cratchit. I want to be here before Cratchit, because I'm going to play a trick on him. And so he's there, and he's in his humbug place, and apparently work starts at 9. I just listened to the book. And at 9:18, Bob crawls in. We now know why, people. It was the gin. And he comes in late for the first and only time ever. And Scrooge says, you're past your time. And Bob grovels and says, I'm so sorry, sir. You're right. I'm past my time. I'll make up for it. It's only once a year. It won't happen again. And he says, no, it won't happen again, because I'm finished with this. This will never happen again. It's not to happen. And of course, he's, Bob's certain he's about to be fired, which would probably mean his family would be out on the streets and starve to death. That's the reality of 1880s London and anywhere else. And he says, so therefore, I'm going to double your salary. Shock is a real thing. Bob doesn't have anything to say. Gotta be the gin talking. Whole new spin on the story now with the booze, hey? And then he says, I'm going to double your salary. I'm going to help you raise that beautiful family of yours. I want to help. I want to be a benefactor. And what's more, here you go, run down and buy a whole scuttle full of coal. A scuttle full of coal. So he does, and there's a booming fire, and it's warm in there, and it's happy in there. And then the story basically ends. There's like another page or two after that, but it speaks volumes. It says, Scrooge was true to his word. It is said he kept Christmas very well. He became like a second father to Tiny Tim. He helped the Cratchit family. Tiny Tim lived and got care and became robust. And he was known broad and wide through the city as an incredibly generous person. He gave heaps of money to charities. He supported the workhouses. He supported the orphanages. He supported starving children. He lived a compassionate, generous, wonderful, transformed life. The end of the story. Thank you. Thanks to Dickens. Why that story? It's a slim little book that just is absorbed into our psyches. We love the redemption. We love the possibility of change. We love the possibility of being seen reality. Apply this to your own lives. What if we could take you through this journey this night? And we can. We just did. Go think about it tonight. If you were swept to see Christmas present right now, people you know, people you don't know, your loved ones, your estranged ones, how would it inform you? What might it move in your heart? What might you choose to let go of? What might you choose to move more toward? When we're faced with the starving feral children of want, of ignorance, are we moved in compassion? What are the steps to compassion? Remember from yesterday, we notice the suffering, we are moved by the suffering, and we're moved to do something to reduce the suffering. Please, in your own ways, to your own beliefs, to your own means, to your own heart, give this season. Go volunteer at the food bank. Drop off not just the typical canned goods, which are wonderful, but drop off something yummy. I like to drop off yummy, expensive stuff, non-perishables, at the food bank. Go volunteer to serve supper on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day with a local church or local outfit. Donate online to all sorts of charities, of humans, of pets. Give of your time to your elderly neighbor that lives alone and is a little tiresome, but sweet. And maybe you go and share a shortbread and a cup of tea. We all have vast capacity for kindness. And whether you're Christian or not, whether you celebrate Christmas or not, irrelevant. It's a reminder, it's a time of year to say, what is compassion? Jesus walked in compassion, non-judgment, and bodhicitta. Buddha walked in compassion, non-judgment, and bodhicitta. How can we emulate that? As the darkness shifts towards the light, as the possibility of redemption is reminded in us, as the light sparkles, metaphorically or literally, on top of the tree, it's not just about stuff. It's not just about what you got. It's not just about what you give. Those are beautiful. Give gifts if you like, receive gifts, wonderful. But Linus, the crass commercialism of Christmas. Snoopy, my commercial dog, says Charlie Brown when Snoopy decorates his doghouse to win the prize for the most crassly decorated house in the town. We lose sight. Enjoy the hell out of the trappings. Eat up your delicious figgy pudding. But contemplate and give and hear the deep teachings in this wonderful tale of the three roots of all suffering. Greed, the feral child of want. Ignorance, the feral child of ignorance. Anger and hatred, Scrooge personified. And the antidotes. What's the antidote to the poison of hatred? Pretty easy guess. Loving kindness. What's the antidote to the poison of greed? Generosity. What's the antidote to the poison of ignorance? Wisdom and clear seeing. That one takes a little more explaining, but for now, that'll do. What can you learn from your inner Scrooge? It's probably reasonably small, and it's not there all the time, but now and then our inner Scrooge, well, what about me? Or I don't want to do that. Or, well, you're probably there for a reason. Whatever it is, I've got them, you've got them. Please, no guilt trips, just wisdom trips. Can I be a little more generous? Can I be a little more kind? How can I step out of my comfort zone and give more freely now and then? Now and then, and then and now. So it's not just some esoteric teaching from India 2,600 years ago. The same way, it's not just some esoteric teaching from Bethlehem some 2024-ish years ago. It's the wisdom teachings of how to be happy, how to suffer less, which is to be compassionate, wise, kind, take compassionate action, generous, clear. Don't react out of anger and smallness, and when you do, clean it up. Work to react out of wisdom and compassion and clear seeing. We could quote Tiny Tim now. God bless us, everyone. Dharma bless us, everyone. So there you go. 2024's Holiday Dharma Talk. Thank you, with a deep bow, to the marvelous Charles Dickens. And so we'll sit for a few minutes together. But please take the most important message, which is transformation is always possible. Everything that was built can be unbuilt. If we have a life of a series of traumas that have left us the way we currently are, we can gently and lovingly work to unbind those conditions and to move into the fullness of our life and our heart now. Through a psychology lens, through a meditation lens, from the evidence of your own experience. I see you, builder, you will build no more. The Buddha also said, everything built can be unbuilt. Everything that affected us, we can unravel in time. And odd as it may sound, one of the ways to do that is to work with concentrating and calming the mind. There are other useful things as well. But this isn't just a calm the mind trip. That's great. If all that happens is we can calm the mind more, that's very wholesome. But it's not just about that. It's seeing through the illusion, seeing through the confusion, and seeing the roots, seeing the cause of suffering, understanding that more, and working to dismantle it. To quote Pink Floyd, just another brick in the wall. That's all our conditions are. And if a brick's in the wall, we can loosen a brick and take it out. One at a time, or maybe we can just blow that thing up. And then the wall's gone. I don't mean to imply it's easy or quick. And I don't mean to imply that simply understanding this makes it all go away. I wish that were true. But understanding this can increase our motivation to keep doing this work and other wholesome work, to see the mind's roots and to work to lift those roots out and to build new flower gardens of kindness and compassion, generosity and wisdom. So we'll sit for 5 or 10 minutes together, meditating on breath in the heart. In a moment, we'll close with a Tashi prayer, a dedication. Have a beautiful evening, beautiful sleep. If ghosts visit you, learn deeply and wisely. And we'll be back here at 7:15 for morning meditation. Could I have a bell ringer volunteer for about 10 past 7, please? As they avoid my eyes. I do it, but I'm a little busy. No, not Shelley. Shelley does everything. Come on, someone, please. Thank you, Ian. I think that's your second time, but thank you. See? Generosity. Good. It's lovely to support each other, and thanks to everyone who did bells. And for some of you, it's not the right time to give, and that's actually a healthy choice. So please don't do a guilt trip on yourself either. I went to some retreats early on where I was so depleted from my giving life and career that to just receive and not do anything was very a healthy choice at that time. So I don't want anybody going out feeling worried about that. May the day be well and the night be well and the midday hours bring happiness too. May the day and the night always be well, and by the blessing of the triple gem, that's the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma, by the blessing of the triple gem, may all be auspicious. God bless us, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody. Yes, Keith, give our best to Reese. I hope she feels better.